In the shadowed cradle of the Frostfang Mountains, where the moon wept silver tears upon the eternal snow, a forgotten vial of spring water gleamed like a promise unkept. Leora Fenn clutched the small glass vial in her gloved hand, its cool weight a fragile anchor against the howling gale that whipped through the trial grounds. The mating trial, a sacred rite twisted by the elders' greed into a brutal gauntlet, unfolded beneath the jagged peaks where ancient pines bowed like supplicants to the lunar queen. Snowflakes danced in the torchlight, each one a fleeting ghost, while the air carried the metallic tang of blood from the first clashes. At 23, Leora had come here not as a conqueror, but as a whisper in the storm, an Omega whose gentleness was deemed weakness by her own pack. Exile had found her months ago in the dim halls of her birth clan, the Silver Paws. Her alpha father, eyes hardened by endless winters, had declared her unfit for the mating bonds. "You heal strays while our borders bleed," he had growled, his voice echoing off ice-crusted walls. No formal banishment, just a quiet shoving into the wilds, left to scavenge or perish, her dowry of woven furs and herbs scattered like insults at her feet. The pack's seer had murmured of a curse. Leora's blood sang too softly, drawing no fierce mates, only pity. Or so they claimed. In truth, it was her refusal to claw her way up the hierarchy, her habit of sharing rations with the orphaned pups and the elderly who shivered in the outer dens. Kindness, in a world of fangs and frostbite, was a blade turned inward. Now, amid the trial's chaos, she sought only survival. The elders of the United Packs, those silver-tongued wolves from the Iron Claws and the Storm Fangs, presided from a dais carved into the mountainside, their thrones draped in pelts stained with the victories of old. Torches sputtered in iron braziers, casting elongated shadows that writhed like specters across the packed snow. Competitors circled the central ring, hulking betas and ambitious alphas, their breaths fogging the air as they tested one another in ritual combat. The moon hung low, full and merciless, illuminating the scars on exposed flesh and the glint of ceremonial blades. Weavos rose sporadically, triumphs or agonies from the fringes where the unbonded watched, their fates hanging on the night's pairings. Leora lingered at the edge, her woolen cloak frayed at the hems from weeks of wandering. The vial in her palm held the last of a hidden spring she had found in the foothills, its waters clear as forgotten dreams. It was her symbol, this tiny relic, a reminder that life persisted even in barren soil, that mercy could quench thirst where power only scorched. She had filled it on the eve of her exile, pressing her lips to the earth in silent prayer to the goddess of the moon, who wove destinies from threads of light and shadow. Now, as the wind clawed at her dark braids, she scanned the weary faces of the lesser warriors, those who had staggered into the trial grounds without fanfare or fortune. A young beta slumped against a boulder, his arm gashed from an early skirmish, blood seeping through crude bandages. His eyes, dull with pain, met hers across the flurry of snow. Without hesitation, Leora approached, her boots sinking into the drifts with soft crunches. The crowd's murmurs faded to a distant hum, the world's clamor yielding to the intimate rhythm of her pulse. She knelt, uncorking the vial with trembling fingers. "Here," she whispered, tilting it to his lips. The water trickled down his parched throat, a cool mercy amid the iron scent of his wound. He gasped, color returning to his cheeks, and for a moment, gratitude flickered in his gaze like a shielded flame. But eyes turned. Whispers slithered through the onlookers, another Omega meddling, diluting the trial's purity. An elder from the Storm Fangs, his fur-ringed robe billowing, sneered from afar. "The weak aid the weak, and both shall freeze." Leora ignored him, capping the vial and rising, her heart a steady drum against the chill. She had learned long ago that compassion was not a currency for approval, but a fire kindled within, unquenched by rejection. Deeper in the ring, the true spectacle unfolded. Alphas clashed in a blur of muscle and moonlight, their roars mingling with the crack of bone on bone. One warrior, broad-shouldered and cloaked in anonymity, caught her eye, not for his prowess, but for the quiet intensity in his stance. He moved like a shadow among giants, his face obscured by a hood of rough-spun wool, no insignia marking his lineage. Yet there was a grace to him, a restrained power that spoke of battles won in silence. When he parried a blow that would have felled a lesser man, his breath came even, controlled, as if the fight were merely a veil for deeper observation. Leora turned away, the wind tugging at her cloak like insistent fingers. The moon climbed higher, bathing the grounds in ethereal blue, and she felt the stirrings of an old ache, the loneliness of one who gave without expectation, who wandered paths untrodden by the proud. Her pack's rejection echoed in the emptiness of her chest, a void where bonds should have bloomed. But here, in this frozen crucible, survival demanded more than endurance. It required the courage to remain soft amid the sharpening world. As the first pairings were called, fated mates drawn by scent and starlight, Leora slipped toward the trial's outer fires, where the unchosen gathered like moths to a hesitant glow. The vial warmed in her grasp, a talisman against the encroaching night. Little did she know, the anonymous warrior's gaze lingered on her form, a crack forming in the armor of his disguise, where guilt and duty had long held sway. The moon watched, silent witness to the unraveling of kings and the quiet rise of the forsaken. The wind howled like a forsaken lover through the trial grounds, carrying the acrid bite of smoke from the outer fires where the unchosen huddled. Leora wove among them, her cloak a gray specter in the moon's unyielding gaze, the vial tucked safely against her chest like a heartbeat borrowed from the earth. The pairings had begun in earnest now, scents mingling in the crisp air, musk of desire, tang of fear, while distant clashes echoed off the Frostfang peaks, steel kissing steel under the silver light. She kept her eyes down, tracing patterns in the snow, each step a deliberate choice to fade into the periphery. Kindness had cost her a home once. Here, it could cost her life. A low groan pulled her from her thoughts, muffled yet insistent, like the rumble of thunder trapped in a cavern. She paused near a cluster of jagged rocks, where shadows pooled deeper than the night. There, slumped against the stone, was the hooded warrior she had glimpsed earlier in the ring. His cloak was torn at the shoulder, dark blood staining the wool in a slow, insidious bloom. He had not fallen in the main fray. No triumphant roar marked his defeat, but something subtler had felled him. A skirmish, perhaps, on the fringes, away from the elder's watchful eyes. His hood had slipped, revealing a face etched by years unspoken. Strong jaw shadowed with stubble, eyes the color of storm-tossed seas, holding a weariness that belied his frame. Leora froze, her breath catching in the chill. Instinct surged through her veins, a primal pull she could not name, drawing her forward as if the moon herself tugged at invisible strings. Omegas were meant to sense need, to nurture the pack's wounds, but this felt different, deeper, like roots seeking hidden water in frozen ground. Fear coiled in her gut. He was no mere beta, his presence radiating a quiet authority that made the air hum. Curiosity warred with caution. Who was this man, fighting without glory, bleeding without cry? She glanced toward the central torches, where the elder silhouettes loomed like judges of the damned, then back to him. To approach was to invite scrutiny. To walk away was to deny the fire flickering in her chest, unbidden and warm. He stirred as she neared, his hand pressing against the gash, fingers slick with crimson. The metallic scent hit her then, sharp and vital, mingling with the pine resin of his cloak. "Stay back," he rasped, voice low and gravel rough, laced with an accent from the high vales, noble yet restrained. His eyes met hers, and for a heartbeat, the world narrowed. The wind stilled, the distant uivos faded, leaving only the rapid thrum of her pulse and the intensity in his gaze, searching, probing, as if he saw through her frayed edges to the marrow of her solitude. Leora hesitated, the vial suddenly heavy in her palm. Rational thought screamed retreat. Elders punished interlopers, and this warrior's wound could be a trap, a ploy by some rival to ensnare the unwary. Yet the pull intensified, instinctive, a whisper from her blood that this stranger's pain echoed her own hidden scars. She knelt slowly, snow crunching under her knees, and pulled a strip of cloth from her satchel, once a bandage for a lost pup, now repurposed. "You're losing too much," she murmured, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Let me bind it. The cold will take the arm if infection sets in." He tensed, muscles coiling like a wolf scenting ambush, but did not pull away. Up close, she saw the lines of his face more clearly. 40 winters, perhaps, marked by battles not of body alone, but of soul. A faint scar traced his temple, silvered by moonlight, and his breath came in measured draws, betraying the control of one who had long mastered pain. "Why?" he demanded. The word edged with suspicion, yet his eyes held no malice, only a guarded curiosity that mirrored her own. "The trial demands strength, not pity. What do you gain from this?" She met his stare, the connection sparking like flint on steel, unwelcome heat blooming in her core. It was not the raw lust of mating sense, but something quieter, more treacherous, recognition. In his guarded vulnerability, she saw her exile reflected, the man who fought unseen as she lived unseen. Fear twisted sharper now. Omegas did not bind fates with strangers, especially not ones who carried the weight of unspoken crowns. "Nothing," she replied softly, dabbing at the wound with the cloth, ignoring the sting of his blood on her skin. "Or perhaps everything. The goddess doesn't tally debts in blood alone." His flinch was subtle as she pressed the makeshift bandage, but he allowed it, his body yielding in a way that spoke of deeper fractures. The air between them thickened, charged with the unspoken. Her curiosity about the shadow he cast, his fear, buried, denied, of the softness she offered. A balm to the hardness power had forged in him. Soren Vale, though she knew him only as this nameless fighter, felt the stirrings of an old self awaken. The king who once knelt for the fallen before duty armored his heart. He rationalized it as mere survival, the trial's chaos demanding unlikely alliances, yet the instinctive bond tugged at him, born of shared isolation amid the fray. As she tied the knot, their fingers brushed, warmth against cold, life against loss. And a shiver ran through her, not from the wind, but from the dawning awareness that this encounter was no accident. The moon crested higher, casting their forms in ethereal silver, while the vial in her pocket seemed to pulse like a second heart. He rose unsteadily, testing the bind, his gaze lingering on her face with a mix of wariness and wonder. "You risk much for a ghost," he said, voice softening, the denial in his tone as much for himself as for her. Leora stood, brushing snow from her cloak, the connection humming unspoken between them, feared, questioned, yet undeniable. "Ghosts need water, too," she whispered, turning toward the fires as the trial's drums resumed their relentless beat. But in that fleeting touch, the seeds of refuge had been sown, fragile as spring's first thaw beneath the eternal frost. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The flames of the outer fires licked at the encroaching dark, their orange tongues flickering like the hesitant breaths of the damned as Leora moved through the throng of the unchosen. The trial's drums pounded a relentless cadence, echoing off the Frostfang crags, while the moon's pale vigil bathed the snow in a sheen of frost-kissed silver. Her fingers still tingled from the warrior's touch, a phantom warmth that seeped into her bones, defying the bite of the wind that clawed at her cloak. She rationalized it as the residue of his blood, vital, insistent, yet deeper. It stirred an unease, a pull toward the shadowed figure she had left behind, bandaged but unbroken. The crowd parted uneasily around her, whispers trailing like smoke, the soft-hearted Omega meddling again. She ignored them, drawing closer to the fires where betas and lesser alphas warmed their hands, their faces gaunt masks illuminated by the blaze. The air hummed with tension, scents layering thick, sweat-soured fear, the musk of unclaimed longing, and now, faintly, the copper tang that followed her from the rocks. She sought solace in the fire's roar, its heat a fleeting embrace against the isolation that gnawed at her core. Exile had taught her to crave such small refuges, places where the world's sharpness dulled to embers. A sudden shout shattered the fragile peace, raw and edged with fury. Leora spun, her heart lurching as three figures emerged from the gloom. Stormfang enforcers, their pelts marked with the Elder's insignia, eyes gleaming with predatory intent. They dragged a limp form toward the central ring, but no, it was the hooded warrior, his steps faltering under their grip. Blood from his shoulder seeped anew through her bandage, staining the snow in crimson petals that bloomed and froze in the cold. "Traitor spy," one snarled, his voice a guttural bark that cut through the murmurs, caught whispering to the shadows, plotting against the sacred rite. The accusation hung like a noose, drawing gasps from the onlookers. In the trial's twisted politics, whispers of corruption festered. The elders, bloated with power, rooted out dissent with fangs bared. Leora's breath caught, the vial in her pocket pressing against her thigh like a warning. She had seen their kind before, enforcers who crushed the weak to prop up the throne, their loyalty bought with scraps of glory. The warrior, Soren, though his name was yet a secret, did not resist, his jaw set in stoic silence, but his eyes scanned the crowd, locking once more on hers. In that gaze, a flicker of recognition, not plea, but shared peril. The common enemy of unchecked authority. The same force that had exiled her for daring to heal. Instinct overrode fear. She stepped forward, her voice rising clear above the din, soft yet unyielding. He fights for no pack, but his own survival. Release him. The trial tests strength, not suspicion. The words escaped before reason could cage them, her pulse thundering like distant thunder. The enforcers turned, their faces twisting in disdain, one advancing with a sneer that bared yellowed fangs. "Mind your place, whelp. Omegas don't speak for warriors." His hand shot out, aiming to shove her aside, but the warrior surged then, breaking free with a restrained ferocity that belied his wound. He intercepted the blow, his body a shield between her and the threat, the impact jarring through them both. Chaos erupted in the firelight. The other two enforcers lunged, fists and boots flying in a blur of gray fur and steel. Leora dodged a wild swing, her cloak tearing as she scrambled to the warrior's side, the snow slick beneath her boots. "We run," she hissed, grabbing his arm, the uninjured one, her touch urgent, electric. He nodded, grim determination etching deeper lines across his brow, and together they bolted toward the fringe of the trial grounds, where the pines loomed like ancient sentinels. The enforcers' roars pursued, mingling with the wind's wail, but the crowd's indifference formed a reluctant barrier, too fearful to intervene in the elders' games. They plunged into the shadowed tree line, branches whipping at their faces, the moon filtering through the canopy in fractured beams. Leora's lungs burned, each gasp a stab of cold, but she did not release him, her grip a lifeline forged in the moment's fury. Behind, the sounds of pursuit faded, swallowed by the forest's hush, until they collapsed against a fallen log in a small hollow, hidden by drifts of snow and overhanging boughs. The air here was thicker, scented with damp earth and resin, a temporary sanctuary amid the storm. She pressed her back to the rough bark, chest heaving, the vial now clutched in her fist like a talisman against the encroaching dread. He slumped beside her, breath ragged, his hood fallen fully now, revealing the full weight of his weariness. 40 years of command etched in the hollows of his cheeks, the subtle scars that mapped a life of hidden wars. Guilt shadowed his eyes. Soren Vale, king in exile from his own throne, his disguise a fragile veil against the corruption he sought to unearth. Protecting her had been impulse, a crack in the armor of duty, awakening the man who once valued lives over legacies. "You should have fled alone," he murmured, voice low, laced with the gravel of pain and something softer, denied. "They'll mark you now as they marked me." Leora met his gaze, the connection deepening in the dim light, empathy weaving through the fear like roots through stone. She saw not just the warrior, but the fracture beneath, the isolation of one burdened by unseen crowns, mirroring her own quiet banishment. "And leave a ghost to fade," she replied, her tone steady, though her hands trembled as she checked his bandage, fingers brushing his skin once more. Warmth bloomed there, unbidden, a bond forming not from scent or ceremony, but from shared defiance, the choice to shield another in a world that devoured the vulnerable. Rationalization flickered in her mind. Mere alliance, survival's pragmatism. Yet the pull intensified. Instinctive, turning curiosity to something visceral, a tether against the lunar night's vast indifference. He covered her hand with his, the gesture brief, laden with unspoken conflict. The wind sighed through the pines, carrying distant weavos that mourned or celebrated, while the moon peered down, her light a silver thread binding their refuge. In that hollow, empathy shifted, hardening into resolve. They were no longer strangers, but allies forged in blood and mercy, the first fragile step toward a union that power and pain would test. The vial gleamed faintly in her grasp, its waters a symbol of persistence, whispering of refugees yet to come amid the gathering storm. The hollow cradled them in uneasy silence, the pines whispering secrets to the wind as if the forest itself conspired to shield their fragile truce. Leora's back pressed against the log's unyielding curve, the rough bark grounding her amid the swirl of her thoughts, while the vial's faint glow pulsed in her palm like a captured star. Snow sifted through the branches overhead, dusting Soren's shoulders in white veils, and the air hung heavy with the scent of pine sap and congealing blood. His blood, a stark reminder of the violence they had fled. Her hand lingered near his, the warmth of that brief contact fading into the chill, yet echoing in her veins like an uninvited rhythm. She rationalized it still. Alliance, nothing more, born of necessity in this lunar labyrinth. But the pull deepened, instinctive threads weaving through her solitude, tugging at the edges of her guarded heart. Soren shifted beside her, his breath steadying, though pain etched faint lines across his brow. 40 winters had honed him into a fortress of restraint, yet here, in this shadowed respite, cracks appeared, guilt from a throne stained by unseen betrayals. The weight of a crown he wore as both scepter and shackle. He watched her sidelong, the storm gray of his eyes reflecting the moon's fractured light filtering through the canopy. "You speak of the goddess as if she listens," he said at last, voice a low murmur that blended with the distant hoot of an owl. "In these mountains, faith is a blade that cuts both ways. What makes you believe mercy has a voice?" Leora turned the vial between her fingers, its glass cool and unyielding, a relic from her exile's dawn. She had always felt it more than seen it, a quiet hum in her blood, a sensitivity to the earth's hidden pulses, dismissed by her pack as Omega whimsy. The Silverpaws had called it weakness, her father's scorn sealing her fate. You see paths where others see walls, but they lead only to ruin. Now, with Soren's wound throbbing faintly under her makeshift bind, that old intuition stirred, sharper than before, as if the moon amplified it, drawing forth what had long slumbered. Fear coiled in her chest, cold as the snow seeping through her boots. To reveal such fragility could shatter their refuge, invite the enforcer's fangs anew. Yet his gaze held no judgment, only a mirrored isolation that mirrored her own banished soul. "The vial," she began, hesitating, her voice soft as falling flakes. "It's from a spring in the foothills, untouched by winter's grasp. I filled it on the night they cast me out, praying for clarity in the void." She uncorked it slowly, the faint trickle of water catching the moonlight, shimmering like liquid silver. Rational thought urged her to stop, survival demanded secrecy, but the bond between them, forged in flight, urged her onward. Tilting it toward his lips, she watched as he drank, his throat working in measured swallows. The water touched his tongue, cool and pure, and something shifted. A warmth bloomed in her core, not mere empathy, but a surge, as if her essence flowed with it, bridging the chasm of their wounds. Soren's eyes widened, the gray depths flickering with an inner light. The pain in his shoulder ebbed, not miraculously healed, but soothed. The infection's insidious creep halted as if invisible roots drank the poison from his blood. He pulled back, staring at the vial, then at her, realization dawning like the moon cresting a peak. It's no ordinary spring. His voice roughened, laced with awe and the undercurrent of dread. As king, he had witnessed seers and shamans, but this was rawer, purer, a gift unbound by ritual, echoing the ancient tales of pathfinders, omegas whose blood mapped destinies, revealing truths the powerful buried deep. Guilt surged within him, hot and unrelenting. He had entered the trial disguised to expose the elders' corruption, their rigged bonds siphoning loyalty from the packs to line their frozen vaults. Yet here, in her quiet offering, he saw his own buried self reflected, the man who had hardened against such mercies to wield the crown, now confronted by the key to his redemption. Leora's breath hitched as the vision unfurled within her, unbidden, triggered by the shared essence of the water. Images cascaded like a river breaking ice, Soren, not as the nameless warrior, but enthroned in a distant hall of ice and iron, his face unmasked, bearing the veil sigil, a snarling wolf wreathed in thorns. Flashes followed, traitorous whispers among the elders, bloodied ledgers of stolen matings, a curse upon his line for choices made in war's shadow. And woven through it all, her own form, a beacon in the storm, guiding him not to conquest, but to atonement. The gift manifested fully now, her pathfinder's sight, a lunar inheritance from the goddess, long suppressed by rejection, pouring forth in visceral waves. She gasped, the vial slipping from her grasp to land softly in the snow, its waters seeping into the earth like an offering. Tears stung her eyes, the cold wind carrying the salt of them. This was no gentle healing, but a revelation that bound them irrevocably, her kindness the thread unraveling his disguise. "You," Soren whispered, his hand reaching for hers, fingers intertwining with a desperation he could no longer deny. The touch ignited sparks, not of lust, but of destiny's forge, her gift illuminating the path he had lost amid duty's thorns. He saw it clearly. She was the key, the Omega whose sight pierced the veils of power, exposing the rot he had come to unearth. Yet with that clarity came torment. To claim her now would taint her light with his shadows, demand she bear the weight of a king's fractured soul. Rationalization crumbled under the weight of truth. The bond was no accident, but the moon's decree, her hidden power the antidote to his guilt-hardened heart. Fear warred in him, fear of vulnerability, of love, as a force that demanded he choose compassion over command. Leora withdrew slightly, the vision's echo throbbing in her temples, a dilemma blooming like blood in snow. To embrace this gift meant stepping from exile's shadows into the trial's blaze, where her sight could topple thrones or crush her anew. The wind howled louder, weavos rising from the distant grounds like mournful choruses, while the moon bore witness, her light etching their forms in silver filigree. In that moment, empathy deepened to something profound, a spiritual tether that whispered of rebirth amid the pain, her revelation not a reward, but a test, forcing Soren to confront whether a fallen king could earn redemption through truth, not decree. The vial's waters glistened, absorbed by the frozen ground, a symbol of persistence that promised renewal, even as the forest's hush pressed in, heavy with the choices yet to come. The moon's unblinking eye pierced the canopy's veil, casting elongated shadows that danced like specters across the hollow, snow-dusted floor. Leora's vision lingered in her veins, a spectral current that blurred the line between sight and sensation. Her Pathfinder's gift now awakened and insistent, pulling at the frayed edges of her resolve. The vial's waters had vanished into the earth, yet their essence hummed within her, a subtle vibration syncing with the earth's frozen pulse, amplifying the revelations that bound her to the man beside her. Soren's hand still hovered near hers, the warmth of his skin a stark contrast to the encroaching frost, but she drew back, the weight of what she had seen pressing like an iron crown upon her brow. His true face, kingly, scarred by the thorns of command, flashed in her mind's eye, intertwined with visions of betrayal, elders hoarding sacred bonds, rival alphas circling like vultures, and a past soaked in the blood of choices he could not unmake. She rose unsteadily, boots sinking into the soft drift, the wind's mournful sigh through the pines carrying the faint echo of pursuit. Weavos from the trial grounds, sharpened now with purpose. The refuge had shattered. Her gift's manifestation was no quiet epiphany, but a beacon, drawing the world's fangs toward them. "We can't stay," she whispered, her voice threading the chill air like a fragile incantation. Fear coiled tight in her chest, not for her own exile's echo, but for the storm she had unwittingly unleashed upon him. The goddess's threads wove cruelly. Her kindness had exposed him, forcing the king from his shadows into the light of judgment. Rationalization flickered. Flee alone. Preserve the fragile freedom her banishment had granted. But the bond, visceral and lunar, anchored her, demanding she face the confrontation her sight foretold. Soren stood with her, his movements fluid despite the wound's lingering ache, the bandage a stark white against his cloak's darkening stain, guilt etched deeper into his features. The melancholic lines of a ruler who had traded mercy for might now cracking under the truth she embodied. "The elders know," he said, voice low and resonant, carrying the timbre of throne rooms long abandoned. "My disguise. It was to witness their rot, the way they twist the mating trial into a market for loyalty. But you've seen it all, haven't you? The traitors in my council, the rival from the Ironclaws who whispers of my downfall." His eyes, storm-gray and haunted, met hers, the admission a confession laid bare by her gift. He had entered as a common warrior to reclaim the man buried beneath the crown's demands. Yet her presence stirred that ghost, tempting him toward a redemption that love alone could forge, not as reward, but as trial. The forest stirred, branches snapping under unseen weight, and they moved as one, slipping deeper into the tree line where the snow thickened into knee-deep barriers. Leora's senses sharpened, her Pathfinder's intuition mapping hidden paths. A faint trail veering toward a frozen ravine where moonlight glinted off ice like shattered mirrors. But the visions pressed harder now, unfolding in staccato bursts, flashes of Soren's past, the pack he had led into war against encroaching rivals, the bloodied fields where mercy had been a luxury he denied. She saw the traitor, Eirik, his once trusted beta, now allied with the elders, his ambition a poison seeping through the pack's veins. And the rival Alpha, thorn of the iron claws, a hulking shadow with eyes like forged steel, who sought the throne through forged matings and spilled royal blood. The weight of it crushed her breath. Her gift was no gentle oracle, but a mirror forcing her to confront the cost of compassion. Would she guide him to war or urge forgiveness, trading power for the freedom of her wandering soul? They emerged at the ravine's edge, a chasm carved by ancient floods, its walls sheathed in hoarfrost that gleamed ethereal under the moon. Below, a narrow ice bridge spanned the void, treacherous and slick, flanked by jagged outcrops where torchlight flickered. Enforcers, closing in from the trial's fringes. Soren halted, his hand on her arm a steadying force, the touch igniting that denied spark anew. "Thorn leads them," he murmured, scenting the air. The musk of betrayal, thick as the metallic tang of impending violence. "He smells my blood on the wind. The elders have promised him my head for the crown." His voice cracked, the ethical king surfacing through the warrior's facade. Duty demanded he fight, reclaim his throne with fang and fury, but her presence whispered of another path, love as redemption, choosing her light over the shadows of vengeance. From the opposite rim, figures materialized, Thorn at the fore, his massive frame silhouetted against the rising flames of their torches, Eric flanking him with a sneer that twisted his scarred muzzle. The rival Alpha's laugh boomed across the chasm, a guttural challenge that set Leora's teeth on edge. The Pretender and his stray Omega, Thorn roared, his voice echoing off the ice like cracking thunder. "Come, Vale, drop the hood. Your little game ends here. The packs tire of your guilt-ridden rule. Join us or feed the ravens." Eric's eyes narrowed on Leora, recognition dawning, the gentle exile, now the seer's bane, her gift a threat to their web of deceit. Soren's body tensed, power coiling like a storm about to break. But he glanced at her, the moral crossroads etched in his gaze. Claim her through royal decree, bind her to his fate, and wage war on the betrayers, or release her to freedom, forgiving the past's stains to earn her truth. Leora's heart thundered, the wind whipping her braids like lunar banners, her blood singing with the choice's gravity. The Pathfinder's sight surged once more, revealing forked paths, one of crimson war, thrones toppling in fire and blood, the other of mercy, where forgiveness mended fractured packs, but at the cost of his crown, and perhaps her heart's quiet exile. "Strength is not in the kill," she breathed, echoing the philosophy that had sustained her through rejection, her hand finding his in defiance of the chasm, "but in the pardon that heals what war breaks." Thorn lunged onto the bridge, ice groaning under his weight, enforcers fanning out with blades drawn, the air alive with the sizzle of torch flames and the pack's rising snarls. Soren's fingers tightened around hers, the bond a tether against the abyss, his melancholy resolve hardening into something profound, the choice to fight not for power, but for the redemption her kindness promised, love as proof amid the gathering storm. The moon wept silver upon the fray, blood's first drops staining the frost as steel met steel, the judgment unfolding in visceral clashes, fangs bared, breaths ragged, souls laid bare under the lunar gaze. Leora stood firm, her gift a guiding flame, forcing them all to weigh freedom against the chains of grudge, the hollow echo of war against the quiet rebirth of forgiveness. In that frozen crucible, the king's buried self roared to life, not in conquest, but in the ethical fire of choosing her, mercy's crown over vengeance's thorns, while the wind howled the dilemma's eternal question, could love redeem what power had shattered, or would it demand a sacrifice deeper than blood? The ice bridge groaned beneath Thorn's thunderous strides, a fractured spine arching over the ravine's yawning maw, where shadows swallowed the moonlight in greedy gulps. Leora's hand clenched in Soren's, the calluses of his palm rough against her skin, a visceral anchor amid the chaos erupting around them. Torch flames hissed in the wind, casting erratic glows that painted the enforcers' faces in demonic orange, their blades glinting like fangs eager for the kill. The air reeked of scorched pine and fresh blood, the first metallic splatters blooming on the frost as steel clashed against steel. Her heart hammered, a wild drum echoing the pack's snarls. But beneath the terror surged her Pathfinder's sight, visions forking like lightning, rivers of crimson if vengeance claimed Soren, or fragile bridges of light if mercy prevailed, mending what war had rent asunder. Thorn barreled forward, his massive bulk shattering the ice in spiderweb cracks, eyes locked on Soren with the feral glee of a usurper tasting victory. "You've hidden long enough, Vale," he bellowed, voice booming off the chasm walls, laced with the smug certainty of one who had woven betrayal into the pack's sacred rites. Eric flanked him, lean and treacherous, his scarred lip curling in a sneer that exposed the rot of old loyalties. The beta's gaze flicked to Leora, venomous recognition igniting. He had whispered her exile to her father, painting her gift as a curse to bury the truth of his own ambitions. "And you, little seer, your meddling ends the pack's golden age. The elder's gold flows to those who seize it, not dreamers who dilute the blood." Soren stepped in front of her, his body a living barrier, the wound in his shoulder throbbing with renewed fire, but his stance unyielding, forged in the ethical fires of a kingship haunted by loss. 40 years of command had taught him the cost of unchecked power, the wars he had waged, leaving fields of frozen corpses, the guilt that coiled like thorns around his throne. Her touch grounded him, her kindness a revelation that cracked the armor he had worn as both shield and prison. Rationalization died in the moment. This was no mere alliance but the moon's decree, demanding he choose not the crown's cold justice, but the warmth of redemption through her eyes. "The trial was never yours to corrupt," he growled, voice resonant with the authority he had feigned to shed, drawing his concealed blade, a king's edge etched with the Vale Wolf. "Eric, you were my blade in the dark, now you slither in it. And Thorn, your hunger blinds you to the pack's true fracture." The enforcers surged, a wall of snarling fury, their boots splintering the bridge further as they closed the gap. Leora pressed against Soren's back, the wind whipping her braids like spectral whips carrying the distant weavos of the trial grounds, echoes of a world unraveling. Her gift flared, unbidden, mapping the fray in luminous threads. Thorn's swing arcing wide, Eric's dagger aimed low for the king's hamstring, a path of escape veering left into the ravine's mist-shrouded depths. But deeper visions clawed at her. Soren's past, the battle where he had spared Eric's life only to breed this serpent. The rival packs crushed under his decree, orphans like her wandering the wastes. Compassion warred with survival. Her exile had been a quiet death, but this confrontation demanded she wield her sight not as weapon, but as scale, weighing love's fragile liberty against the chains of grudge. Soren parried Thorn's first blow, the impact jarring through his arm like thunder, sparks flying from clashing steel under the moon's indifferent gaze. He moved with the grace of one who had danced death's edge for decades, but his strikes held restraint. No killing fury, only the measured force to disarm, to expose rather than eviscerate. An enforcer lunged at Leora, blade whistling through the air, but she dodged, her intuition guiding her feet across the fracturing ice, the vial's memory pulsing in her veins like a second pulse. She snatched a fallen torch from the snow, its flames roaring to life in her grasp, and thrust it toward the attacker, the heat searing his fur, forcing him back with a yelp. The act ignited something primal in her, the rejected Omega rising not in rage, but in the quiet ferocity of one who had learned strength in Mercy's forge. Eric circled, opportunistic, his dagger flashing toward Soren's flank. "You spared me once, my king," he spat, the title twisted like a curse. But weakness invites the blade. The elders pay in gold for your head. The packs need a ruler with teeth, not tears. The words struck deeper than steel, reopening the wound of Soren's guilt, the beta he had elevated from rags, only to see ambition sour into treason. Leora saw it all in a heartbeat's vision. Eric's hand in the rigged matings, siphoning bonds to fuel Thorn's claim, the bloodied ledgers hidden in the elders' vaults. Her voice cut through the din, raw and unyielding, born of the philosophy that had sustained her through banishment. Teeth break the pack as surely as they guard it. What strength is there in betrayal, when forgiveness could rebuild what you've shattered? Thorn laughed, a guttural bark that shook loose ice shards into the abyss, but Soren seized the opening, disarming Eric with a swift twist that sent the dagger skittering over the edge. The beta staggered, eyes widening in shock, and for a flicker, regret shadowed his face, the ghost of the loyal warrior he had been. Soren's blade hovered at his throat, the king's breath ragged, the moral precipice yawning before him. Claim vengeance, and the packs would fracture further, war's cycle devouring all. Offer pardon, and risk the throne's fall, but earn the rebirth her light promised. Leora's hand found his arm, her touch a balm against the storm within him, her own dilemma mirroring his. Guide him to war, and bind her freedom to his shadows, urge mercy, and risk exile anew, her gift dismissed as folly once more. The bridge buckled, a deafening crack splitting the air as Thorn charged again, his axe cleaving toward Soren's chest. The king shoved Eric aside, the beta tumbling into the snow, and met the blow head-on, the force driving him to one knee. Blood welled from a gash across his ribs, warm and slick, staining the ice in dark rivulets that froze almost instantly. Leora cried out, the sound lost in the wind's howl, her sight revealing the choice's crux. Thorn's death would crown Soren in infamy, but sparing him could unravel the corruption, forging unity from division. "Not like this," she pleaded, her voice threading the fray, tears freezing on her lashes. "Power demands your hardness, but love asks for your truth. Choose me, not the kill." Soren rose, eyes locking with hers amid the swirl of snow and flame, the bond between them a luminous thread against the encroaching dark. Thorn pressed the attack, but the king sidestepped, using the rival's momentum to trip him, sending the alpha sprawling toward the bridge's edge. Enforcers faltered, their snarls turning to uncertainty as Eric scrambled up, torn between flight and fealty. The moon crested fully now, bathing the chasm in silver absolution, illuminating the ethical fire in Soren's gaze. Redemption not in conquest, but in the mercy that mirrored her own rejected heart. He extended a hand to Thorn, not blade, but offer, pardon or perdition, the pack's fate hanging on the razor's edge of forgiveness. Leora's pulse thundered, the wind carrying the scent of blood and pine, her soul laid bare in the dilemma's grip. Could compassion crown the fallen, or would war's shadow claim them all, love's proof forged only in sacrifice's unrelenting cold? The ravine's maw exhaled a frigid breath, swirling snow into veils that blurred the line between earth and abyss, as Soren's outstretched hand hung suspended in the moon's merciless light. Thorn sprawled at the bridge's crumbling lip, his axe lodged in the ice like a defiant stake, chest heaving with the labored fury of a beast denied its kill. Blood from Soren's ribs traced rivulets down his side, freezing in crimson lace against his skin, the metallic warmth a stark counterpoint to the wind's icy talons raking their faces. Leora's fingers dug into Soren's arm, her touch a silent plea woven from the threads of her awakened sight. Visions of forked fates dissolving into one luminous path, not the blaze of vengeance, but the quiet forge of mercy, where love's union mended what power had fractured. Thorn's eyes, forged steel dulled by shock, flicked from Soren's hand to the enforcers frozen in their advance, their torches sputtering like hesitant stars. Eirik knelt in the snow nearby, his dagger lost to the depths. The beta's scarred features twisted in a maelstrom of resentment and reluctant awe, the ghost of loyalty stirring beneath the venom of ambition. The air thrummed with the pack's distant howls, a choral lament rising from the trial grounds, where the elder's corruption teetered on the edge of exposure. Leora's heart clenched, the Pathfinder's gift pulsing in her blood like the vial's absorbed waters, revealing the fragility of this precipice. Thorn's pride could shatter the bridge, dragging them all into the void, or yield, birthing a rebirth from the ruins of betrayal. "Take it," Soren urged, his voice a gravel anchor amid the groan of fracturing ice, laced with the melancholy depth of a king who had long buried his softer self beneath duty's weight. 40 winters of command had scarred him deeper than any blade, the wars where he had chosen survival over souls, the guilt that coiled like thorns around his throne, hardening him until her kindness cracked the shell. Now, in her gaze, he saw the man he might reclaim. Not through royal decree, but through the ethical fire of forgiveness, earning her bond, not as conquest, but as proof of redemption. Rationalization had fled with the wind. This choice was visceral, a sacrifice of the crown's unyielding grip for the healing warmth of her light, union forged in the renunciation of vengeance. Thorn hesitated, his massive frame trembling not from cold, but from the unraveling of certainties, the illusion that power's teeth alone sustained the pax. Leora's sight unfurled once more, intimate and unrelenting. Flashes of Thorn's own losses, a mate stolen by Soren's old wars, fueling his grudge into a crown of thorns. Compassion surged through her, born of her exile's hollow ache. The rejection that had taught her strength lay not in claws, but in the mercy that bridged chasms wider than this ravine. "The packs bleed from our grudges," she called across the frost, her voice steady despite the tears tracing frozen paths down her cheeks, the wind carrying her words like lunar whispers. "Heal with us, or the blood you spill will drown your own legacy. Freedom isn't in the throne. It's in the choice to rise unbroken." The rival alpha's snarl fractured, a guttural sound yielding to something rawer, as he grasped Soren's hand. The bridge shuddered but held, ice cracking like brittle bones under the shift of weight, enforcers lowering their blades in stunned deference. Eirik rose slowly, his eyes meeting Soren's with a flicker of the old fealty, the traitor's web collapsing under the weight of witnessed grace. "You've poisoned us with your softness," Eirik muttered. But the venom ebbed, replaced by the dawning shame of one confronted by the mirror of his betrayals. Soren pulled Thorn to his feet, the two alphas standing chest to chest, breaths mingling in visible clouds, the moon etching their scars in silver relief. No victor, but allies forged in the crucible of pardon. The enforcers retreated, murmuring oaths of renewed loyalty, their torches weaving a retreating glow through the pines as the howls from the trial grounds shifted, triumphant now, sensing the tide's turn. Soren turned to Leora, his storm-gray eyes softening, the guilt that had shadowed him dissolving like mist under dawn. He cupped her face, thumbs brushing away the frozen tears, the touch igniting a profound warmth that seeped into her core, chasing the chill of her wandering years. "You are my revelation," he murmured, voice thick with the emotion of a soul unburdened, the king's melancholy yielding to the quiet joy of rebirth. "Not claimed by crown, but chosen in truth. The pax will heal through us, your light, my strength, woven as one." Leora's breath caught, the bond sealing in that instant, not the instinctive pull of sense or ceremonies, but a deliberate union, resisted through fear and rationalized through exile's scars, now accepted as destiny's gentle decree. Her Pathfinder's gift hummed in harmony, visions blooming of mended packs, elders dethroned by truth, matings restored to sacred purpose, her vials spring waters flowing freely through thawed lands. Yet the cost lingered, a subtle ache, the sacrifice of her solitary freedom for this shared throne, the renunciation of quiet wanderings for the fire of love's proof. She leaned into him, their foreheads touching, the wind sighing approval through the branches, carrying the scent of pine and fresh-fallen snow, blood's tang fading into earth's forgiving embrace. They crossed the bridge together, Thorn and Eric trailing in wary vigil, the ravine below a silent testament to choices unmade. The trial grounds awaited, transformed under the moon's benediction, torches flaring brighter, the elders' dais emptying as whispers of the king's return spread like wildfire. Leora walked at Soren's side, her hand in his a symbol of persistence, the absorbed vial's essence reborn in their intertwined fates, spring amid eternal winter, mercy crowning the fallen. In the heart of the Frostfangs, where snow wept silver and winds howled ancient songs, rejection yielded to renascimento, love's redemption not a reward, but the ultimate trial. Two souls, scarred and steadfast, stepping into the light of a new dawn, where power bowed to compassion, and the goddess's threads wove eternity from threads of pain and grace. The moon lingered, her silver gaze a final witness as the packs gathered, breaths held in collective awe, the eternal dance of blood and fire yielding to the quiet pulse of healing hearts. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.